Hello everybody and welcome to another React tutorial for beginners. Now in this video, I'm going to be covering props, otherwise known as properties. Now these are things that we can pass to our React components to allow them to have some dynamic behavior and to kind of change what they do or what they render based on the properties that we're passing through. You can kind of think of them as parameters for a function, and in fact, that's exactly what they're going to look like here when we work through our first example with our functional components. Now, the first thing I'll address here is just a few of the warnings we're getting here inside of our console. Now, you don't have to worry about these too much. I've just done some kind of slightly incorrect things with our HTML. Really, for the purpose of this tutorial, it's not a big deal at all because we're going to be changing all of this, and add item and all this stuff is going to be removed by the time we actually kind of get into the core of the application. A lot of stuff I'm showing you right now is just very simple examples just to illustrate these kind of React concepts. So if I make any small mistakes with the HTML or CSS or whatever, just ignore them. Not a big deal. We'll fix them later on. Anyways, what we're going to do now is talk about props. All right, so looking at this input tag here, we can kind of see our first example of what a prop might look like. Now, this is slightly different, but we can see we have type, we have value, and we have ID, and all of these things here actually change the behavior or what the input tag looks like. Same thing for label, same thing for form. We could pass, a method to our form, all kinds of other stuff we can give to all of these tags. And those are kind of the properties of these tags. So in the same way that we can pass them to these default HTML tags, we can pass them to our own components. And the way we do that is we just write the name of our property. This is whatever we want. Really, I can say text is equal to, and then I can just pass some value. So I can say text is equal to Tim. So there you go. I've just passed a prop called text equal Tim to add item. Now add item isn't doing anything with that prop, but notice we're not getting any errors, and this is totally fine. We can just pass this through. That's okay. We can pass another prop. We could say number is equal to, and then inside of curly braces, whenever you pass a number, you need to do this. I can pass maybe 2. Notice again, no errors. These are properties of this tag. So how do we access these props or these properties? Well, you need to go to add item, and you need to actually define a parameter called props. Now that you do this, we can use this props variable here to access all of the properties that are passed through. And this by default is going to be a JavaScript object, and the object is kind of going to look like the following. It's going to have whatever the name of the properties are, and then colon, and then their value. So in this case, on the first render of add item, it would be text, and then Tim, and then it would be number, and then 2, and then obviously these would be separated with a comma. And so that means if you want to access a specific prop, what you need to do is write props dot and then the name of that prop. So here I can go to value, and I can change this to be props dot and then text. And now what you're going to see is that, okay, we're getting a warning. You don't have to worry about that. Let me just refresh this here. We get Tim showing up. And then there's nothing showing up for these other 2 ones because, well, we didn't pass text for the next 2 add items. However, now if I change text to be maybe, Joe, and then we say text is equal to, and we'll just say test, and we save, you can see that it's showing up in all of the respective fields. Again, you can kind of ignore the warnings for right now, just trying to show you how the props work. So there you go. That is how you can actually access props and pass them through to a component. Really straightforward. I don't need to define exactly what props I'm looking to accept. I can just define this props variable here, then pass through a JavaScript object that has all of these props. React will automatically do this for us, and then we can access them as we please. Now, what I could also do is maybe render one of these props, right? I could do a p tag, and then I could do inside of here props.number. And now if a number prop is passed, you're going to see that that is rendered here inside of the p tag. And so 2 is being rendered here, but obviously for the other ones, there was no number prop. And so nothing is showing up. So there you go. That is the basics of passing through props. Now, what you can also do, though, is you can kind of omit this prefix here of props by decomposing or kind of breaking down the JavaScript object that's passed through. Now, there is a formal name for the syntax I'm about to use. I can never remember what it is, so someone please do correct me in the comments. I believe it's like decomposing or breaking down or deconstructing or something like that. But what I can do is write text and write number like this, corresponding with the name of the props that are passed through. And now what this is actually going to do is it's going to look in that JavaScript object, and it's going to assign any object or any field, I guess, that's called text to this text variable, and any field called number to this number variable. And now I can access my props by just using this, right? So text or number rather than having that props prefix. So this is sometimes preferred, especially if you only have a few props or there's only a few that you maybe want to actually look at. And so what is it saying the error is here? Okay, so if I refresh, it's all working now. We can see that we are rendering the number and we are rendering the text. Now, you would only want to do this if you only have a few props. It can get kind of messy if you are writing out hundreds of different properties or something and decomposing all of them. But this is a good way to just extract the ones that you want, especially if you only have a few that you're looking for. All right, so I'm going to change this back to be props because I want to talk to you about some of the properties, no pun intended, of props. So let's change this back to be props.number, and let's change this to be props.text. Now note that we could omit this value variable here, and we could just write props.text. In fact, let's actually just go ahead and do that. Okay, so now you can see if I refresh or I save and I refresh, everything is working, no problems. Now, what are the properties of props? So we will continue in 1 second, but I need to quickly thank the sponsor of this video and this series, which is AlgoExpert. AlgoExpert is the best platform to use when preparing for your software engineering coding interviews. They have over 155 coding interview questions and an extensive online browser-based coding environment that allows you to write all of your code in one place without leaving the browser. Check out AlgoExpert from the link in the description and use the code TechWithTim for a discount on the platform. All right, so what are some things that we need to know about props? Well, the first and most important thing to understand is that props are read-only values. What that means is that you cannot change a property from inside of the component that it's being passed to. So if I go here and I write props.text is equal to whatever, you're going to see that when I save, we get an error here, cannot assign to read-only property text of object. Again, that is because this is a read-only value, and so we cannot modify it. However, if you do decompose these props and you do something like text and then number, now you are fine to modify these. The reason you are fine to modify these is because these are not actually the props that are passed through to the component. Now, that may seem a little bit confusing or counterintuitive. The thing is, we pass a JavaScript object that contains the text and contains the number. Now, when you do this, what happens is text is a new variable and number is a new variable that's storing a copy of whatever was passed through for the prompts. And so by modifying text or modifying number, you are not actually modifying what directly was passed through. You're modifying a copy of it. And so you don't get an error because these here, you can see if I just hover over it, var text, var number, they're not read-only values, but these here are. And so that is why it is fine to modify them if they're passed in this way, but you still probably shouldn't do that because that's just not great React practice. So let's go back to props like that. Again, just note this is the actual JavaScript object, whereas before we have variables that are storing copies of what's inside of the JavaScript object. Okay, so let me save this now and refresh. I think everything is good. All right, so the next thing I want to show you is something known as default props. So we saw here when we passed through number that this is the only number we're passing through, right? In these two add items, we aren't passing a prop called number. Now in our example, that's fine. We're not getting any errors, but sometimes you may be performing some logic or you may need to ensure that there is actually a value for a prop. And while it's difficult to enforce that someone is going to pass this prop, although I will show you kind of a way that we can do that in a second. And so instead what we can do is give a default value for this property so that if it is not passed, we will use the default instead. Now there's two ways to do this. The first way is to kind of write out the other notation. So to have text and then number, and then inside of here, you can say number, which is one of your props, is equal to, and then whatever its default value is. So in this case, if I made it 4, and I just, oops, I'm gonna have to change this now. So instead of props.text, it says text. Instead of props.number, it says number. So now if I save and I refresh, you can see this is fine. And when we do not pass a number through, it defaults to the value 4. So just like you would make a default parameter, same thing here, you can say number is equal to, and then 4. Nice. So that's a way that you can do a default prop. Now, another way that you can do a default prop if you don't want to write out this notation here and kind of decompose your different values is you can go back to props. And then after your function, you can write the name of the function. So add item dot and then default props is equal to a JavaScript object. And then you can write the key or the name of your prop. So in this case, I'll say number, colon, and then I can give it a default value. This time, let's do 1. And now when I save this, you can see we're updating and we have the default value of 1. Now, of course, if I change this to 2, this updates to 2. And I could do the same thing for text. I could make this equal to default. And now if I do not pass any text, you will see that default is what is going to show up. So that is the way that you can do default props for functional components. So now that we've looked at props inside of our functional components, it's time to look at them inside of our class-based components. So I'm going to go over to info.js. I'm going to show you how we can implement props in here. It's going to first involve defining a constructor. So we're going to say constructor, props, and then parentheses, or not parentheses. I call these curly braces, squiggly brackets, whatever. And then what I'm going to do is call the super constructor and pass through these same props. Now, it's very important that you call this super constructor here. What this is doing is calling the constructor of the class that you are inheriting from. So in this case, React.component. The reason you need to do this is because this here has its own constructor. That constructor is going to set up the actual component. And well, you need to manually call it when you go ahead and override the constructor inside of the child class. And you need to make sure you pass through the same props that are accepted in this constructor to the super constructor so that it will do everything properly and you won't run into any errors. Now, inside of the class-based components, I'm going to recommend you do not decompose your props. You can write something like, text, number here, whatever, but you're going to run into a few errors, and this is not kind of the React way to do it. Instead, you should just take in props like this. All right, so now that we have this, what we can do is we could console.log our props like that. Or if we wanted to access our props and maybe render them on the screen or something, we could do something like this, .props, and then whatever the name is. In this case, let's actually just take a title prop, and I will kind of write a title prop in 1 second. So whenever you are not inside of the constructor and you want to access the props, you need to use the this keyword. Now, these work the exact same as they do in the functional components. They are read-only. You cannot modify them. All right, so now if I go to app.js, I go to info, and I pass a title is equal to inventory. If I don't absolutely butcher the spelling there, and I save, notice the title is going to change. If I change this to be Tim, you see that it changes. And so there you go. That is how you can accept props inside of a class-based component. Now, to do default props for a class-based component, since we're not going to do that kind of deconstructing syntax, what we're going to do is write the name of the component. So in this case, info.defaultProps is equal to, and then the same way as we did for the functional components, we'll say something like title, colon, and then default. And now if I don't pass a title, so let's go here, you're going to see that we get the default prop that is being used. Awesome. So now we have covered default props and props in functional and class-based components. Now I'm going to talk to you about prop types. Now this is getting a bit more advanced. We don't really need to use prop types, but if we want to enforce or at least kind of tell our user what type we are looking for a specific prop, we can do that. And the way we do that is we go to add item, or we write add item, the name of our component, and we say .prop types. And then we make this equal to a JavaScript object, and then we start defining our fields. So in this case, I could say number, and then we define the type of this field. Now, the way that we define all of these types is we say prop types and then dot and then number or string or whatever the appropriate type is. Now, notice is going to tell me that prop types is not defined. That's because we need to actually import it from React. So if I go up here, what I can do is say import and then prop types from, and then this is going to be, I believe, prop types. Let's see if that's correct. Let me save here and notice that now we are not getting an error. So that's what we need to do when we want to use prop types. You need to go import prop types from prop types. Let me just look in the console and make sure that this is fine. Okay, I believe everything is working all right. And now we can see that we can say number, and we can make this equal to prop types dot number. Now let's actually open up the console and let's see what happens if I don't pass a number here. So if instead I pass, number equals hello. So let's save this now and notice that we get a warning, failed prop type, invalid prop number of type string supplied to add item. So this isn't going to crash our program. It's not actually enforcing that this happens, but now whoever's using this is going to get a warning telling them that they're using the incorrect prop type. And so that is why you would use prop types. Oftentimes, if you're working on larger projects or you're working with other people, you want to define what types your prompts are supposed to be so that people don't pass in the invalid prompts. Now, there's a bunch of other types. I'm not going to go through all of them, but of course, for text, we could say that text is equal to the prop types dot string, and then this would kind of do the same thing. It would ensure that we are going to have the text being equal to a string, and sorry, it won't ensure it, but it will give us a warning if we pass something that's not a string. So if I pass a number here, make this text equals 2, we're going to get another warning here, invalid prop type text of type number supplied to add item. So you can kind of look through these prop types on your own. Again, I'm not going to go through them in this video. That is how you can define the different prop types. Now, in the exact same way you do this for functional components, you can do it for class-based components. So info.proptypes is equal to, and then you would do title, colon, and then prop types dot string. However, you need to make sure you import that. So we're going to go up here and say import, and we're going to import prop types from, and then prop types like that. Save, and then we are good to go. All right, so with that said, that's going to conclude this video. Hopefully that helped you guys understand what props are, why and how you use them, and how you can implement default props and prop types. Now, obviously, we haven't done anything super useful right now. These are just silly examples to kind of get you up and running with React and show you how things work. In the next video, we're going to be talking briefly about styling. We'll then be talking about state. And then finally, we'll actually start kind of building out our application and working on some components that we'll keep, that we're not just going to be messing around with, and that will be a part of our final inventory management application. With that said, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next React tutorial.